This conversation is for world-class considerations only. Be clear these concepts are not meant to apply to the open A and regional A classes. For the 2025 season, the bullet point considering risk has been added to the Scholastic World sheet. This makes the world class sheets the same with the exception of the class descriptor. Remembering when we added risk to the independent sheet, we were working to acknowledge risk that was already in place. The same is true for the Scholastic class. We've seen these efforts around risk for years in the class and are simply acknowledging the efforts that are already in place as well as creating a pathway for recognition and reward. In all classes, we have to remember that a certain amount of risk is inherent to every skill. Each degree of risk is heightened or lessened depending on the performer's understanding and ability. This is typically connected to the performer's point of development. In the world classes where our performers are at their highest level of ability and understanding, moments of risk can be isolated beyond assumption and into recognizable categories of choreographic, programmatic, and compositional risk. The world class is responsible for finding new applications for the language of color guard. Gone are the days of simply adding a rotation to your high event and then expecting that to be considered a world class effort. That would be the equivalent of changing the font of a word to bold and then expecting it to shift the word's meaning. In the world class, we expect exploration, discovery, and invention, but we also have to recognize the process and know that initial efforts around this type of growth doesn't always result in immediate success. Developing the technical and creative skills for the language of risk, especially during the initial progression from the open class, can take years. Developing the sensibilities that create new context and settings considering risk are indeed inherent risk to all in the world class and especially daunting for those recently promoted groups. As we acknowledge risk, we must keep going to the question of successful to what degree? Because an effort is new doesn't assume it is successful. What does the risk get the group that would be missing without it? Is it tangible? Is it worth something? Is the effort itself world class? The other side of that coin is a group better off without the effort? Does the group offer a significant strength in other aspects of the caption that offset the lack of efforts around risk? Is that alternative itself a world class strength or simply a mask for vulnerability? Is it opening a door for the language or is it simply adding a rotation? If in describing this alternative, we find ourselves in the positive of the answers, then they are actually taking on a risk that may be seen initially as a non risk. If the answers are on the negative side, then you're seeing simply an added rotation. Not nothing, but not necessarily world class. The steering committee stressed that the understanding of risk must be broadened. You'll see in the summary paragraphs in the manual that we make a point of qualifying risk as overt as well as subtle. You'll also notice in the point it talks about the variety of risks and difficulty. This will force us to dig deeper in our recognition skills and perhaps follow up conversations with lead judges and caption managers. Like performers and instructors, judges too will have a learning curve. You're fortunate to have had the experience with the independents to help prime the pump. Stay curious as you broaden your understanding and be open as you experience. The bullet of risk is also accompanied by safety and compatibility. Safety appears on every sheet and each class within the context of each caption. This is to protect the performers and to prevent overreach by overly ambitious creative teams that may work beyond the capacities of their performers, often without the technical support needed to ensure safe percentages. Compatibility in this world-class context needs a bit of qualifying. We already know the role of compatibility and its importance in the regional A and A classes. It is key to their competitive success. Looking at the recent years, the A class champions have proven this point, with each one looking like an exemplary A class group. Compatibility in this context is the end game. It is the gamble between the challenge and achievement that the instructor takes at the start of the season, considering the group's potential for growth over the entirety of the season. In the factored system that rewards excellence, this strategy stays in line with the class emphasis on training. In the world class consideration of risk, Compatibility supports and qualifies the risk. Compatibility is not the end game of the bullet point, risk is. The risk must be compatible to the performers, but compatibility does not possess the same value in the context without risk. You've heard me say time and again, great achievement does not exist without great challenge. World class achievement does not exist without world class challenge. The race being run is a world class race with world class expectations. Each group will have its own ceiling for compatible risk. Remember that, as with everything, these ceilings of compatible risk will include the spectrum between strength and vulnerability and will not be equal among groups. Isolated compatibility may be equal, but compatible risk will most likely not be equal. Compatibility in this context is the support qualifier for risk, not vice versa. And the compatibility is not a hiding place for the lack of exploration. In the world class, we do not reward compatibility in isolation.